generation narcissist,
disengaged.
uninformed.
Until recently, these were the labels that our generation had to bear. But we are not the sum of these words. We are much more than that.
Hello, my name is Elena Sassine, and I am a senior at La Jolla Country Day School.
My name is Kira Moak, and I'm a junior at Pacific Ridge School. Welcome.
Today, we, the students from La Jolla Country Day in Pacific Ridge, organize to educate, engage, and empower not only the members of our community here this evening, but the hundreds and thousands of other students across the nation who do not have a forum like this.
We are no longer passive participants of the political process. We are not the silent majority. We are vocal, and we are here to hold our elected officials accountable for their actions and words.
The fact of the matter is this: the national dialogue is changing. Our voices matter.
This upcoming season, the fate of the composition of the House of Representatives hangs in the balance. The winner of the 49th district may determine the future of the House. For this reason, this race will be one of the most highly watched and contested battles this cycle.
It is time for us to act upon our moral imperative, to organize in the name of democracy, and to bring our issues into the political agenda.
The questions you will hear today were created by the student organizers, and the candidates have no foreknowledge of their content.
At this time, we would like to extend our welcome to tonight's moderator, Editor-in-Chief of the Voice of San Diego, Scott Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to Pacific Ridge and La Jolla Country Day for putting this on. It is great to see young people involved. Voice of San Diego is a nonprofit news outlet. We do two things. We do investigative journalism, and we do explanatory journalism. It's our belief that apathy, as she described, is not actually something you can describe unless you have proven yourself that people really do understand how their community works, what the Port of San Diego does, how the school board's elections work, what the County of San Diego does, how that differs from the City of San Diego. I was watching a Fox News clip this morning where they got those two things mixed up, city and county. And the county's in the news, of course, because of today it passed a resolution joining the Trump administration's lawsuit against California as it pursues this clarification in the law about what law enforcement, local law enforcement, can do and cannot do with federal law enforcement. And it was a juxtaposition with the Republican mayor of the city of San Diego, and several other city officials are actually in Mexico City right now. It was just another sign of our times about how interesting this is. And this race is, of course, an important one. So I don't actually know what the questions are this time. The students are in charge of this. And so we'll go through. I do have a script here, but I will hold the candidates accountable for their answers, and I want to talk to them and make sure that the kids' questions, the students' questions are dealt with. But first of all, let me ask, how many people are eligible to vote in this audience? Okay. How many of you have made up your minds already? Okay. How many of you have a slight indication what you want to do? How many of you are truly open-minded and you're ready to decide? All right. Great. And to those of you watching and those of you watching on recording, thank you for being engaged. This is where we can really have an influence. Okay, each candidate will have 30 seconds for an opening statement. Students will ask a question, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. Students will be responsible for keeping time. I have a pretty loose interpretation after that, though. I want to make sure candidates feel like they have fairness. Could you scoot back just a little bit so I can see everybody? I want to be able to see the end. It's hard to cut somebody off unless I can see him.
In which case?
Yes. And so students will be responsible for keeping time. They're sitting in the front row here. A bell will ring when the candidates have 10 seconds remaining. Each candidate will have the opportunity to give a 1-minute rebuttal at a self-selected time during the forum. The candidate does not have to use this rebuttal opportunity. The desire to use a rebuttal will be indicated by holding up the card. Does everybody have one? Okay. The candidate may lower the card when I acknowledge you. Okay. I'm supposed to keep you on topic again, and I will use that liberally. But also, if I do notice that somebody's been attacked or presented, I might give moderators prerogative an opportunity for you guys to respond directly. I'm going to call a halt at 7:50. Somebody better tell me when that is, and then you'll have 30 seconds for a closing statement. And then we'll have 2 more students close it out. Is everybody good? All right, let's do this. Let's rumble a little bit. It'll be fun. We're going to model civil and civic behavior and discussion here and just have a good discussion about the future of the Republic. All right. First, opening statements. We're going to start with Josh Hancock. Josh?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Do I stand up or do I just talk seated?
You know, whatever you feel comfortable with.
I'm used to talking from standing up, so. My name's Josh Hancock. I'm a Marine veteran and an Eagle Scout. Been a resident of Oceanside for over 20 years. I work up at San Onofre, and I am the Libertarian Party candidate. I am a fiscal conservative, and I want to hold the government accountable for how much money they spend and how much they tax us. Last year I got taxed at 45%, and the taxes generally keep going up, especially in California. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Sara Jacobs.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you so much to the student organizers. This is really amazing. I'm Sara Jacobs, although in this room may be better known as Josh and Jet's cousin. And like many women around the country, I never thought that I would be running for office. But our country is in a defining moment. And like many of you, I'm looking at a broken Washington, and I just don't want the same politicians with the same ideas. I joined the Obama administration because I believed in his message that change was possible, and I still believe that today. So thank you again. Looking forward to questions.
Man, you guys are nailing this 30-second thing. All right. Next up, Paul Kerr.
Wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. When I was 16, my mom was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. My family was almost pushed into bankruptcy. As a result, I went in the Navy, spent 3 years, honorably discharged, spent the next 9 years working minimum wage jobs on the wrong end of income inequality. By the time I got to San Diego State, I was 29. I had to work full-time to get through college and take on over $20,000 in student loan debt. Folks, it's hard to encompass yourself in that short a period of time, but I look forward to the rest of this conversation with you today. My name is Paul Kerr.
Nice work. Mike Levin.
Well, thank you all for having me tonight. I'm incredibly honored to be here and thankful for all the hard work of all the students. It's the students that are really organizing our campaign and making it truly special. I'm a clean energy advocate and an environmental attorney with over a decade of public policy experience working across the aisle to get things done, passing legislation at both the state and the federal level. I'm fighting every day for social, economic, and environmental justice. I am a proud progressive. I will always stand up to Donald Trump, and I doubt the Republicans on stage will do the same. You have to ask them, whose side are you on, California or Trump? Because there's no middle ground.
Okay, next up, Brian Maryott.
Hey, good evening. It's very nice to be here. So thank you for all the effort you've put in. I was chatting with a couple of the students at the site before here, and it's just great to hear their enthusiasm about a level of involvement this year and their excitement about the future of our country and their role in it. So very inspirational. I'm a certified financial planner by training, 25-year business career that I recently retired from to focus on public service. I'm on the council in San Juan Capistrano, where I'm the mayor pro tem. Same week I retired, Darrell Issa announced his retirement from the race, from Congress. I'm one of a handful of Republicans, and we got in the race the next day. We've been going since January 13th. It's nice to be with you this evening.
Thank you. Jordan?
Joshua Schoonover.
Oh, okay.
So I'm Joshua Schoonover. I'm a patent attorney. Prior to that, I was an engineer. I went to San Diego State. I believe in individual freedom, personal accountability, low taxes, a small government, and a very strong military. Thanks to Pacific Ridge and to La Jolla Country Day School for inviting me out here to participate today.
Okay, that was my fault. Now Jordan? No Jordan Mills? All right. Colonel Doug Applegate, let's hear from you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here tonight. You might remember me. Together, we ran off Darrell Issa from the 49th. I'm running again because Congress is still broken, and the Republicans won't do anything about Donald Trump. He is wholly unfit for command. He's a threat to our national security, and we need to do something about Congress who will not vote on the use of military force. The unconstitutional use of our military must end, and it must end right here, right now.
Perfect. Okay, let's move to our first question. The students that will be asking are Lauren Nicoria or Jordan Mindell. Is Jordan? There you go. Sorry, Jared.
Don't worry about it. Okay, so with the recent passing of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2018, many across the country fear an insurmountable public debt. What would you do, if anything, to reduce the public debt?
Okay, first question answer goes to Sara Jacobs.
Well, thanks for asking this question. Look, I think it's okay to do deficit spending, but only if we're using it for investments in things that are going to grow our economy, like infrastructure spending or like forgiving student loan debt. I think it's totally irresponsible that the Republicans in Congress passed a tax cut that's going to add $1.3 trillion to our deficit, only to give big corporations and their wealthy donors a tax cut at the expense of the rest of us. I was reading a study yesterday, actually, that said that for every dollar that we invest in prevention of childhood poverty now, it actually saves us $7 down the road. So I also think we need to reframe the discussion. It's not about do we spend or do we not spend. It's about do we spend now or do we spend more later. And so if we can focus our spending now on things that will prevent the need for future higher spending, like preventative health care, like focusing on prevention of childhood poverty, then I think we'll be in much better shape down the road in terms of our deficit.
Is there a level of debt that you feel is unsustainable or something you have to recover from?
I think what we've heard from economists is that it hasn't been since the 80s or early 90s that we've gone to a level of debt that actually they feel puts our economy at risk. I think we're very far away from that level now, and so we need to focus on how we can use the spending that we need to grow our economy.
I see you, sir. We'll get there. One quick thing on
Sure.
the president's tax cuts, the Republican tax
Yeah.
cuts, or the reform. Is there a part of that you did support?
Well, I think some of the provisions they put in for the middle class tax cuts are good. For instance, I think we should expand the earned income tax credit. I think we should expand the child tax credit. I would have increased the refundability of them in addition to expanded them and made them permanent.
Okay. Paul Kerr.
Folks, I've been a business, is this working?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All set.
I've been a business owner for the last 20 years, and I know how important it is that you have more money coming in than you have going out, and I'd be willing to bet there's a number of small business owners in this room and future small business owners in this room. It's imperative that we get to a place where we can ultimately balance the budget. But we can't do it on the backs of seniors, and that's my biggest problem with what we're talking about right now are the proposed cuts to Medicare and the proposed cuts to Social Security, the Social Security in particular. Now, this is a contract that we've made with everybody in this room. We're all paying into it as we speak. We cannot violate that contract. We cannot let our seniors down. The recent tax cut is nothing more than a tax scam, okay? I am of the opinion that this is a process by which we put so much burden on the federal government to pay the interest on our debt, which is ballooning, that we result in a situation where we no longer have money for social programs like education, like the Environmental Protection Agency and the protection of so many of the environmental issues that are so important to us. She agrees with me. Folks, it's critically important that we reverse this tax scam, in fact, because although there was some relatively minor, benefit to low-income, middle-class families, that by and large, this was a tax bill that was geared to benefit the uber-wealthy and major corporations. And I don't get it. For the last 6 years in a row, major corporations in this country have been recording record profits, yet they say they're not competitive. I don't believe it. We've got to address this issue, and we've got to reverse this particular tax scam. And in fact, we've got to make it easier for low-income and middle-class families to get by instead of harder.
Just one quick clarification on, you mentioned the Medicare and Social Security and not to touch those. Does that include not touching the age limit, for example, or the age at which you can qualify for those programs, or also the payroll taxes?
Yes.
Just don't touch any of that.
We not only have to, well, when you say touch the payroll tax, I do want to touch the payroll tax. I want to apply that payroll tax on all income above $500,000 in order to provide for the long-term viability of both Social Security and Medicare.
But the age limits are...
But the age limits, no.
Next up, Mike Levin.
Well, I think we need to make some serious changes, and unfortunately, neither party is taking this issue near seriously enough. Just in the next 10 years, from 2019 to 2028, the federal deficit and debt is going to go out of control. Based on the current projections by the Congressional Budget Office, we're going to add another $12.4 trillion to our current debt. And if we keep it up, our debt will be equivalent to our GDP. We're going to have the most significant debt crisis since World War II, and it's of our own doing. Because what we did in a time of prosperity is pass $1.5 trillion tax cut for the wealthiest Americans who don't need it, and big corporations who continue to ship jobs offshore. What we need to do is, I believe, have a more progressive tax system, one in which those at the very top are paying their fair share. What the Republicans want to do, whether they'll admit it on stage here or not, and definitely what those who aren't here, Chavez, Harkey, Gaspar, what they would love to do if they get to Congress is dig into Social Security, into Medicare, into Medicaid. That's what Paul Ryan wanted to do. Now, I think the people of Wisconsin were about to show Paul Ryan the door, in part because they knew that he was going to go after their Social Security, their Medicaid, and their Medicare. That's why he wanted those tax cuts in place in the first place, because I don't buy the trickle-down argument that those tax cuts are going to magically create economic growth across the economic spectrum. Never have, never will. Instead, what we need to do is invest in the future. We need to make sure that we have, again, bold, progressive tax policies where we're creating the jobs of the future, including in infrastructure. We need a Green New Deal from coast to coast. I'm a clean energy advocate. I believe we need to do across this country what we've done in California, develop the solar and wind industry across this country, as well as electric vehicles. It has been a miraculous success in California. We've got 78,000 solar jobs alone in this state that are growing at 17 times the rate of our economy as a whole. We can do it in the country.
So that was perhaps the most alarmist take about the state of the debt and how it will grow. Would you support new taxes to abate that?
I would support returning taxes to where they were under President Ronald Reagan, where we had a fairer tax system. What we have done under this president is a giveaway for those at the very top of the economic spectrum, and it's been done specifically, 81% of those cuts go to the very top 1%. We have Darrell Issa right now. He's a congressperson who's fought for the very top 1%. I want to be a congressperson to fight for the other 99%.
Thank you. Brian?
So thank you. So the original question, tax cuts and spending. So the Tax Reform Act, and I'd love to be a part of the second round of this with the president, which the president has alluded to next year, was a terrific package. My family takes a hit, and some other folks we know take a hit. And we're happy to do so because the broad structure of the tax reform package is broadly very, very helpful to our district. So 6 out of 7 retirees get a meaningful break in their taxes. 90% of our families in this district, which are 90% middle class, get a nice break. And the next time somebody tells you that $80 a month is nothing, let them know that $80 a month in a 529 plan with an average return of 7% is going to get you about $31,000, $32,000 to start college with. And I think that's certainly something for today's middle class families. Block this rhetoric about the top percent, the top 20%. 80-20 is the breakdown of taxation. So anytime you have a broad tax package, it's going to benefit everybody on a relative basis. The debt, as a simple math figure, is in a problematic area. It isn't nearly as bad as it was post-World War II, but you could argue that we are in a time of a 15 to 20-year war winding down. We've been in Kosovo, so we've had a branch of our service in motion for about almost 20 years now. The cumulative debt roughly doubled under President Obama, but he ran through a pretty tough stretch of years as well, so that was a part of that. Nobody's touching Social Security and Medicare. You simply can't. It's taking 20 years to move the age, which is being moved, Paul, for two years, 65, 67, I believe, kicks in 2023. It took 20 years to do because politically it's just very impossible to do. You simply can't do it. The politics are just too difficult. Those are things that people have earned, and they give us tremendous peace of mind late in life. It's the ultimate pension system. The only way to get the debt and deficit in a meaningful range or a moderate range is to grow the economy. We're going to have to grow the economy 3.5% to 4% for the next 8 or 10 years. The tax package is the first step in helping to do that. Thank you.
In that tax package, in order to balance it and pass it the way that they did, they had to say that in several years, taxes on the middle class would go up. Would you support that, or how would you deal with it?
It wasn't actually to balance and get it the way it is. It's a legislative issue. It was because they couldn't get a supermajority, sure. And so it's part of the law. It has to be temporary, and in round 2, we would hope that it would be permanent. I would submit to you that tax plan, and remember, every Democrat's been calling for relief for the corporate, which is all of us, by the way. Half of you students, or the students here tonight, are probably going to go to work for a corporation. Your teacher's pension plan depends on corporate performance. So
specific,
we're all corporate America.
The question was how to deal with that retroactive tax increase, or how?
Right, no, I understand. And so the way we deal with it is to get some Democrats to vote for round 2, which will make it permanent. Not a single Democrat, I believe, voted for this package. Had a Democrat president presented it, I would submit to you 70%
so it's not
would
to
have.
pay for it in a different way, it's just to cut them again.
No, the only way to make it permanent is to get the right majority so that it legally doesn't have to be temporary like it does now. Thank you.
Joshua?
This is Jordan. I'm late. I think I'm supposed to be here.
Is that okay, judges? All right. Jordan, we're talking about taxes and debt.
Yeah, I've been streaming it on the freeway on the 5, trust me. This is actually the question I wanted to answer the most. My name is Jordan Mills. I'm from the Peace and Freedom Party, and everything I wanted to say in my opening statement can be answered as an answer to this question as well. Because the values and the fiscal responsibility that's talked to about both the parties on this stage can be consistent. You know, Republicans want to balance the budget and want to make it so that people aren't being taxed to death. And at the same time, my Democratic counterparts believe that they should have things like universal health care and housing and a relief from some of the austerity programs that working people have faced ever since neoliberal economics became the leading economic theory out there. But they can't do it. I'm going to tell you that both parties will not be able to do it. And you know why? It's because there's a 900-pound gorilla in the middle of the room, and that's the war on terror that we've started that's lasted a generation now, where we've spent $5 trillion, which we're escalating as we speak in Syria, which guarantees that no one's going to be able to follow through with any of the budgetary proposals they're talking about. We're talking about one of the largest expenses ever. I don't think we've gotten what we wanted out of it. I don't think we've gotten security from it. I don't think we're safe from terrorism because of it. I don't think we've left any of the countries in better shape than we found them. And now we're in a situation where we're in a quagmire throughout the region, and we're spending trillions and trillions of more dollars. Meanwhile, the people in Flint, Michigan don't even have water they can drink. And it takes 2 people working a full-time job to raise a family, and that's stretching it in San Diego County, where a generation ago it took 1. Look, there is no way anyone can do any of these things unless we step back from our addiction to this war that we're putting on a credit card. And you just can't do that. And yeah, I'm against the budget bill that was passed. It's a war on working people, and especially a war on California's working people. But there's no solution to that under the status quo if we kept our tax structure either, as long as we have this war.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mills. Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah. Well, I am very concerned about the national debt, as I believe every conservative is. We are in a financial mess. That's the truth of it. And there's really only 2 ways to solve it. We can increase revenues. How do we do that? We create more jobs. We strengthen the economy. I support President Trump's budget. He had to make some cuts. And some of those cuts are heartfelt and painful, but it had to be done. That's the second way we can improve the situation. We can increase revenues. We can decrease spending.
I'm sorry, what cuts did he make?
The budget. He made cuts to a lot of different agencies. He required all agencies to make cuts across the board. So I said, I support the president's budget. I know it's tough. A lot of agencies across the board are feeling the pain, But in our families, sometimes if we're in a financial struggle, we need to either make more money or cut our spending. And in the government, we need to do the same thing. I think there are rare occasions where deficit spending is acceptable, but I generally am against deficit spending. I preferred Herman Cain's 999 plan. Unfortunately, that wasn't even considered. The one thing I did like about the tax bill and Jobs Act was the pass-through income was decreased to 20% tax. Most small businesses are flow-through entity businesses, small businesses, and they benefit when they have a flow-through tax that's reduced from, I believe it was 35 to now 20. So I'm happy about that. That's what I would do. I would try to increase revenue by improving the economy, creating jobs, and I would concurrently try to reduce spending. Thanks.
Good. Mr. Applegate?
Thank you. Okay, we talked about the worst debt situation we were ever in after World War II. What did we do? It was called the GI Bill. That's how people lifted themselves up by the bootstrap, by education. What have we done to this generation? What have we done to millennials? Burdened you with debt. The fact of the matter is, overall, we have a second-class education system internationally. We need to start earlier at preschool. My youngest daughter started preschool at 2. We need to go through public education, including university or apprenticeship, through 16 years. But you aren't going to work for that, quote, corporation all your life. You're going to change your jobs. You're going to have education all the way through. You're going to have to be retrained. This whole tax bill, we've seen it all before if you're old enough. It was called trickle-down economics. I was an economics major at Arizona State. This doesn't work. It's not going to work here. One of the biggest problems with the tax cut is we've already jump-started the economy, and if we have an economic turn down, what are we going to do then? You aren't going to be able to give additional tax cuts. That was Keynesian economics. You've got $1.3 trillion worth of student debt. And yes, my generation and a generation older than me are asking all of you to pay more in Social Security taxes that you can't find jobs with. This is going to be complicated, but we're going to have to spend wisely. And yes, it's costing too much with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and 80 other countries. You're going to need somebody that can speak truth to fact about military spending. That's why I ran. That's why I ran again. I can speak to it.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, are you comfortable with the level of debt that the country is running right now?
No, actually, in the war colleges, this has been described as a national security issue.
So what would you do about it?
Well, you're going to have to increase revenue. That's why I started with, you're going to have to take off the brakes on this generation so they don't get out of college with 30, 40, 50K in college debt. And the tax cuts aren't going to be paid for. The fact of the matter is they're going to increase the debt. And if they aren't paid for, in 10 years, you're going, for the first time in history, our debt, national debt, will exceed 100% of our gross domestic product. That's a problem. That's a national security issue.
I'm sorry, I'm still unclear on the connection between investing in education and lowering the debt.
Because the economy post-World War II was the most robust all the way through the 60s until we got to the guns and butter dilemma caused by the Vietnam War. This is all, we've been through this economically before.
Got it. And Mr. Hancock.
All right, being a libertarian, fiscal conservative, we have $22 trillion or $21.1 trillion in debt. I rechecked before I came here, which is $740 billion annually of what our government spends over what we take in. And if we continue, the interest on the national debt, the last time I checked, it was like $340 billion every year that the government is the interest on the national debt. It just keeps increasing. To get rid of the debt, the only way is you need to cut. Right now we spend $900 billion in defense. We have, say, 3 bases. We have troops in over 177 different countries. We do need some power globally. not a whole lot. We need to lessen, we have 3 bases in Italy. We could probably cut out 2 of those bases. We have, with increased tax cuts, later you're gonna get increased taxes because they have to adjust for the deficit spending. So we need to cut before we can spend, basically.
Got it. Now, I was very interested in all the responses had some form of cutting, perhaps in the even military. Now, some didn't mention military. Is there anyone on stage here that supports the level of military spending that we have right now and just wants to? You're good. Anybody else good with the level of military spending we have now? All right. Next question goes to Petra Engstrom. Petra, let's hear it.
In recent months, we've become more aware of the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault. What changes would you support to ensure everyone, but especially women, feel safe in the workplace?
Mr. Kerr, they've designated you to respond first.
As I mentioned earlier, I've owned a business for the last 20 years. We've had a zero tolerance policy for the last 20 years. It's a situation where you have to follow up and immediately. Over that 20-year frame, we've had one problem. That was a problem that we became aware of on a Friday morning, and that gentleman was gone by Friday afternoon. You have systems in place, you deal with it. Now, part of the question, obviously, is the situation that's going on in Washington, where we have members of Congress who are sexually harassing staff and using federal dollars to pay off settlements. And all this is done behind closed doors, and nobody's hearing anything about it. I've repeatedly called for resignations for members of both sides of the aisle, because this is a problem that we've found is on both sides of the aisle. And we not only have to bring this problem out to the open, we need to stand together. We need to make sure that this is not acceptable in the workplace. This is not acceptable in schools. This is not acceptable in Washington, D.C. For those members of Congress that have been involved with this, they need to resign today, and we need to bring all of this out into the open.
Thank you. Mr. Levin?
Well, I agree with Paul that we have to expose those members of Congress who are guilty of having settled sexual harassment cases. They need to resign. They also need to pay back taxpayers for the money that was wasted on those settlements. And I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing from Jackie Spear and others in the House to try to deal with this issue. But it's not just in the House of Representatives. We have a real problem in our society with a culture of toxic masculinity. And I believe that's where a lot of this stems from. I have 2 young children, a son and a daughter, and I am raising my son to not embrace that culture, but to respect everybody regardless of gender or gender identity. And I think, unfortunately, we have a president of the United States who sets an example. It was very, very nice when we had a president that we could be proud of, who acted with dignity and respect for all people. I don't believe that to be the case today. I don't believe that that's how he thinks. I don't believe that that's what he says. And I believe we need to reject with everything we have that culture. And that means in the workplace, it doesn't just mean zero tolerance for sexual assault, sexual harassment. It means equal pay. It means providing child care access, particularly for those single moms for whom child care is so incredibly expensive. It means in the military, making sure not just that we avoid sexual harassment and assault, but that we have more women that are in positions of leadership in the military, that are flag officers in the military. Just the same in corporate America. There are not nearly enough Fortune 500 CEOs who are women. There is not nearly enough leadership among corporate America, companies that are being led by women. I am incredibly honored that my campaign was one of the first 2 in the entire country for Congress to be endorsed by the National Organization for Women, because I do believe that there are some men out there who are feminists too, and that we can all work together, but because what is good for women is also good for men, it's good for families, and it's good for America.
Thank you. Mr. Maryott?
So I just retired from 25 years in the corporate world, and for almost all, and probably all of those years, there were very well-defined workplace rules, regular education around those rules, and I would say that leaving zero ambiguity has probably been the last 10 or 12 years in terms of real strengthening of those rules and the communication of those. But clearly, throughout society, we continue to have a problem. We continue to have a problem with this notion that somehow it's just a little bit more of a little boy or a young man or a man's world than it is a little girl or a young lady or a woman's world. And there's very little on the stage that's been said on this that I would disagree with. We just have to wash that out of society. You know, and I'm sure all of you students, you know, that your families, I presume, you've gotten that kind of attitude. I would hope, you know, we have a 15-year-old boy, a 10-year-old daughter, and a 3-year-old daughter, and I want to coach and encourage them to think that way and think in terms of true equality and to be gentlemen and ladies and to respect everyone whose presence they're in. And I think collectively, if we do that as a society, all that old school stuff that is so deplorable will change rapidly. And all of you young people have so much ability to influence that going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Mills?
Yeah, I guess I want to answer this question with two different ways. The first is what a congressperson who is elected to Congress could do. The most important thing, and yes, obviously anyone elected to public office who's found guilty of sexually harassing people or who has a record of sexually harassing people should not be in office. And that goes all the way to the top, the President of the United States. And of course I agree that the public servants that we pay, the rates of sexual assault and harassment in the military and among police families are nauseating. And the federal government is not doing everything it can to remedy those situations amongst public employees. But even more importantly, this whole talk about cutting public services and fiscal austerity has cashed out in a big backlog at the EEOC. You know, you can complain about sexual harassment, and you can have good, solid evidence for it, and you can have all your ducks in a row, and it can still take years to have any kind of remedy for the harassment you're facing. And sometimes these are people who are living check to check. You know, sexual harassment is in many ways a working person's issue because women often have the kind of jobs where they lack the security to be able to walk away from a situation where they're being abused. They're often in a situation where domestic violence happens because they don't have an alternative, any place to go. And in a time when working people have contingent labor and the wages have been going down and people are worried about going bankrupt because of health care, you can be in a situation where people tolerate a lot of things that are morally objectionable and they shouldn't have to. Strengthening unions and strengthening working people's organizations are the best way to do that formally. And then lastly, there are some things that Congress cannot do, which is why I call on anyone who's interested in this issue to join me in the streets. I'm the member of an organization called Women Organized to Resist and Defend, and we get together to talk about things like fake abortion clinics and the rollback of women's reproductive choice and sexual harassment and the Me Too movement. And we have lots of meetings down in San Diego, and we would love to have more people involved because the rights of women are the rights of the majority of people in America, and it should be one of the most important issues for every person with a conscience.
Okay. Mr. Hancock. Schoonover.
Joshua Schoonover. I get to say my name a lot during this event tonight. Anyway, sexual harassment and sexual assault, it is occurring in the workplace. And you know what? Whether I have the honor to represent you in this district or it's someone else on this stage, the reality is there's not a whole lot we can do about it. In terms of government agency legislation, we can enact some legislation there. But sexual harassment and sexual assault is addressed by the California Penal Code. It's a California state law. There's also municipal laws involved, but it's not a lot of federal legislation. But I want to speak to the young girls here who are going to college because I've read some statistics before coming here and I printed them out right here. 1 in 4 of you will probably encounter a rape or an attempted rape. That's according to the statistics. And the reason that's so high is a lot to do with alcohol. 66% of those are attributed to alcohol and intoxication. So I want to ask all of the young ladies in the audience, when you go to college, stay away from those parties where alcohol is prevalent. don't drink. And if you are going to drink, be responsible. Have responsible friends. And, take ownership of yourself. There's a lot more you can do to prevent sexual harassment and sexual assault against yourself than I can do. Thanks.
So I do have to follow up real quick. Kind of felt the room move on that one. So what about the men's responsibility? Are you implying?
Okay. You are right. It's not your job. And I apologize if I placed that burden on you. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I'm going to tell her the same things I've told you here tonight. Do not drink alcohol in college because it leads to drunk driving, it leads to bad decisions, and it leads to a lot of things. But as far as men out there, yes, men need to learn how to treat women. Where I come from as a conservative, we hold women up on a pedestal. We treat women with the respect they deserve. And that's the way we ought to treat our young boys as they're growing up. I'm an Eagle Scout. In that program, I learned how to respect women. I think those programs are good for people. My point is, with this whole line of questioning, I think that us as individuals have a lot to do with this situation. And if we make poor choices, we can expect those results.
Mr. Hancock? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do Mr. Applegate. And
Thank you very
you're
much.
on the list, but I got you.
Everybody up here is talking about this as if the court system and the Constitution doesn't exist, all right? There's questions of due process. This is what you need to do. The same thing that I did with my daughter, just started at UC Davis, and my son, who's been at San Diego State for 4 years. I keep telling him he's not going to be on a 6-year plan, it's 5. We need to have more education courses, both for men and women, so people know how to report the sexual assault, so they don't make the mistakes that a sharp defense attorney can take advantage of. We need to educate everybody about not tolerating things. The best thing that came out of the Me Too movement is believe the woman. Then we need to recognize the system of justice that we have. Unions can set up grievances, but what we all need to do is to be able to set up those grievances ourselves, and that's what we've been missing the boat on with respect to putting out people into the workplace, people into the college environment. And trust me, I've been through the process with parents. We aren't educating people enough so they can report the sexual assaults or worse. And that's what can change things at the point when you get into court. And when you get into court, whether or not to keep a job or whether or not to prosecute someone criminally. That is what we need to do, is to prep young men, young women on how to report it and how to tell their story effectively.
Yes.
All right. I work for a Fortune 500 company, and we get quarterly training on sexual harassment, what not to do. No means no. Also, I used to be a military policeman in the Marines, and that's right. You need to report it. No means no. If you don't want to be a victim, don't be a victim. Be able to defend yourself. If you're down on your phone walking, that's victim mentality, and predators look for that sort of thing. You need to empower yourself to not put yourself in those situations. When I was an MP, I went to a few, not very many, because either they weren't reported or they were scared to report it, or they didn't want to look bad in front of the guys. But you need to say no, you need to report things. That's very important. And as far as the guys in Congress I have zero tolerance. You should have, they're in a high representation of the land. They're in Congress. They should be held to a higher standard than everybody else. They shouldn't be using taxpayer money. The fiscal conservative comes out again. Any spending that takes taxpayers' money, I'm very much against. Like exactly the bombings. 109 Tomahawk missiles were launched into Syria. That's $1 million apiece. That could have went to Flint, Michigan, even though it's completely separate budgets. It didn't accomplish anything, so.
Just to, the thing about the phones,
Yeah.
you're not saying they can't look at their phones
No.
or they'll get assaulted?
Just be aware of your surroundings. In the basic self-defense, you always be aware of what's around you. You know where the exits are, you know where possible attacks could come from. If you are walking with your cell phone, you're oblivious to anything that could come and get you.
Okay, got it. Ms. Jacobs.
You may notice there's something a little bit different about me than everyone else on this stage. And Congress is even worse. Less than 20% of Congress is female, and that matters. Because I didn't need the Me Too movement to know that sexual harassment in the workplace was a problem. I've lived it. And we need to hold our elected leaders to a higher standard. And with all due respect, I don't want to be respected on a pedestal. I want to be respected as an equal. Because if we don't have leaders who can respect women as equals in their personal lives, how can we expect them to make and write legislation that will accurately reflect our needs and respect us equally in the legislation? So to all of the young women here, first of all, nothing you did or nothing you will do means that you deserve any of these things. 1 in 4 of us is likely to be harassed or assaulted in our lifetime, and it is not because you were looking at your phones or drinking alcohol, although don't drink till you're 21, obviously. And we need to make sure we're protecting women in the military. We need to make sure we're protecting women on college campuses, that we are giving colleges the funding they need to accurately live up to their Title IX requirements. But we also need to remember that there are so many women, low-income women, especially LGBTQ plus identifying women, who are going to be assaulted and have no mechanisms in place. It's not just about reporting, because reporting doesn't matter if there is a system in place that protects the abusers at the expense of the victim. And we need to make sure that we're focusing on ending the epidemic of violence against trans women of color that's happening in this country right now as well.
Okay, hold on for a sec.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go down and ask each candidate. I'm, for one, tired of surprises as somebody gets in office about what they've been accused of or not in the past. Have you ever been accused of assaulting, harassing, or discriminating against anybody?
No.
Mr. Kerr?
No.
No.
Somebody get that man in mind.
No!
No.
Mr. Applegate?
No.
No.
Okay. Next question comes to us from Akela Srivastava. Akela?
After the recent shooting at Parkland, there have been multiple discussions about changes that the government can or wants to implement to reduce gun violence. What changes would you personally push for at a federal level?
Okay, so this one will start with Mr. Levin.
Well, we need to ban assault weapons, plain and simple. We don't need weapons of war in our communities, in our schools. We also don't need the ammunition that is military grade in our communities. This is pretty simple when you think about it. We have people that think that more guns make us safe, and we all know that that's not the case. I drop off my children at school every morning. The other day I dropped my son off. I got to the car, I turned on the radio, and I heard Donald Trump saying the answer to all our problems is arming more teachers. And I have to tell you, the teachers here, I don't think would agree with that. I have 2 aunts that are public school teachers who told me that's about the stupidest idea they had ever heard. I also think we need universal background checks, and we need to fully fund the CDC research into the gun violence epidemic. We have 33,000 people a year unnecessarily killed because of guns. And the other thing that we all have to collectively do is stand up to the political power of the NRA. And you've got to have somebody who's willing to stand tooth and nail and fight them, and not just vote the right way on gun violence prevention, but organize. My background is as a political organizer. I try to get things done and build coalitions. And it will be the people that led those walkouts of those high schools, including a lot of those who work on our campaign, Our interns led those walkouts in many of the campuses. And hopefully in Congress, we won't screw it up. The work that you started, the organizing that you started, you need organizers in Congress who can work with you, who can turn the March for Our Lives into real collective action, because it should not take another Parkland to finally resolve this problem. We get one shot to get this right. If we don't get it right now, how many more people are going to die on the watch of those in Congress? Shame on them and shame on the NRA.
And I'm going to follow up with every candidate about this. One of the federal issues that are of most interest to local officials is the issue of concealed carry permits and their reciprocity across states. The idea that if you have a concealed carry permit in one state, you should be able to have it here. Do you support that reciprocity?
Absolutely not. Is there anybody in this room that wants the gun laws of West Virginia to apply to San Diego?
All right,
Is there one person? You do? Well, we'll talk later. I want to hear it.
Second question is, would you support an amendment to change the Second Amendment?
I don't think we need to change the Second Amendment. I think we need to correctly interpret the Second Amendment.
Good. All right. Mr. Maryott.
Thank you.
Now you're getting all the money.
Yeah, that's okay. So Parkland was such a horrible, horrible tragedy. We have a son in high school. As parents, you worry so much about these things. Our high schools seem so vulnerable. It's a very interesting period of years for children. There's the hormones, the drama, the bullying, drugs and alcohol. It's very tough. And I think the school violence, the shooting violence in particular, is really a three-part issue to be addressed, and I'll try to hit them all quickly. The first, I believe, is campus security, and I say this because I think it's the lowest lying fruit. I don't think we should arm teachers. I do think that there are probably one or two natural positions on a campus that could be particularly well suited for somebody who's former military or former law enforcement, and to have two armed people who are well trained on campus. To be opposed to that, I think, is just to be ignorant. I really do. I just don't see how, with what's going on in high schools, we can continue to ignore that with 1,000, 1,500 kids on high schools that need to be, campuses that need to be protected. The second thing is these tremendous disconnects we have with mental health and with the coordination of local services. Parkland was a huge disconnect in that, but we've seen it elsewhere. So all of that needs to be looked at, and I'm sure there's a federal role to be had there, and certainly the national background checks is a part of that. The third thing is lethality of weapons. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment in general, although I think anybody who wants to look to repeal it or amend it should go through the effort, and I commend you for your passion to do that. That's the right way to go about it. Don't vilify it, others. Just go about it the right way if you want to try to amend the Second Amendment or repeal it. But I do believe that the regulation of guns sits at the state level. I'm comfortable with California state law. I don't support at this time reciprocity across state lines to carry. Frankly, I just don't trust other states on the issue and folks coming into our state at this current time. I think I hit your other follow-up as well. Thanks.
Just quickly, he mentioned an assault weapon ban.
Well, we effectively have one in California. I'm not sure what's right for California is right for Missouri. If you're 2 hours from a police station in Missouri and you think more about, and for some, they are very, very popular weapons for a variety of reasons. And I would certainly look at the debate at a federal level. We did it in the 80s with fully automatic weapons, and of course we did it with partially automatics as well. And we had the ban until 1994, and it was allowed to expire, and it was never reinstituted by either Republicans or Democrats when they had the majority.
Thank you, Mr. Maryott. Mills?
Yeah, well, obviously I had two sets of emotions following the latest tragedy. And the latest tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy, they just keep happening. It's like no one's doing anything about it. And yet it's a body count that just keeps growing and growing and growing. And of course, that's horror you feel. But you also feel a sense of real hope when those students got together and empowered themselves and walked out. And looking at some of the demands that they were making that exceeded just gun control demands, some of the things that they were talking about in terms of empowering themselves and guaranteeing themselves opportunity. It's a movement that I think we can all get behind, and I think it's horrific that some people vilified the brave students who stood up. That being said, I just don't think we should let the NRA control the way we frame this debate. I mean, we shouldn't let the people who make the guns, the industry that manufactures them and has an interest in selling them as much as possible, set the terms of a debate where you have either zero regulation on guns at all and we sell them to as many countries as much as we can and we allow everyone to have them in every situation, or you're against the Second Amendment. Well, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, gun safety programs, there are dozens of common sense gun regulations that can be used to reduce this kind of horror, and I don't think anyone thinks that it makes sense to confiscate guns from everybody, especially when that's not a workable sort of a way to solve the problem. And so it's a straw person that they set up so that you identify common sense gun regulations with something that it isn't. But beyond that, I think the most important thing is there's a root to this, and it's the toxic masculinity and white supremacy that's there. This is part of a burgeoning violent fascist movement in the United States. Those are the people that are standing up. You know, they say it's bullying. You don't see a lot of queer kids picking up guns and shooting their things. You don't see women doing it as much. You don't see certain people do it. The reason why you see a demographic doing it is because there's a climate of hatred and racism in this country, and it spits itself out in these horrific school shootings.
Just to be fair, concealed carry reciprocity?
Okay, I wanted to answer that.
Quick, yes.
Yeah. We passed against concealed carry. Ronald Reagan did it with the blessing of the NRA in 1967 so they could disarm the Black Panthers. The Peace and Freedom Party was based on supporting the Black Panther Party. It's ironic that these days it's turned into a liberal cause celebrity when literally the reason concealed carry was banned in California with the benefit of the hypocritical evil NRA was when Ronald Reagan wanted to take guns away from community organizers like the Black Panthers. So there's a dark history to that question, and I'm glad I got a chance to answer it.
You're welcome. Mr. Schoonover.
Yes, so I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe that the government, the federal government, in particular, anyone on this stage who represents you, has no right to pass legislation that infringes on your ability to keep and bear arms. I understand the California laws. I have an AR-15 myself, and it's been rendered inoperable based on all the changes I've had to make to it. I've lost a lot of friends who have moved to other states for primarily 3 reasons: the tax situation in California, the inability to ride their dirt bike, and the gun laws. So, you know, I'm seeing California break up families and friendships and a lot of people moving out of this state. I would not support any legislation which infringes on the Second Amendment. And regarding the reciprocity of concealed carry permits, I support it. I think people who have been given one have been vetted, and they should have the right in every state in which they travel.
Okay. Mr. Applegate.
Okay. I'm the only one up here that's handled a lot of weapons, and I'm not just talking about my own personal weapons. I'm talking about weapons that sit in an armory. One of the problems that we have is people remain in the shadows in the darkness, and they come out, and we're surprised when they're the mass shooters. Now, I'm for background checks everywhere you go, but it's not going to stop the mass shooters. You're going to have to work to try to change the Second Amendment interpretation or by amendment because it's for a well-regulated militia. But here's what you can get gun owners to get behind, and that is to require them every year. I've maintained this before I started running 3 years ago. Go to a live class. Go to a combat qualification range. Prove to me and us and to the country you're a good guy with a gun. Trust me, if you've ever been on a range with 2 strangers, one to each side, you keep your eye on them when they've got a loaded gun. The NRA, let's talk about the NRA. The fact of the matter is, what the NRA gives, which was nearly $500 million in the last presidential election, the membership does not support that amount of money. What we need to do is the same thing with Citizens United and require disclosure of everything that funds that, because it's the weapons manufacturers. We need to do something practical before we can get to what the thing that the other people aren't really talking about is assault weapons off of our streets. 40% rise once the assault weapon ban ended in Congress. Here's the other little secret. I'll talk about you with afterwards more time. The assault weapons that you can buy in California look the same as what I carried, and trust me, they can be just as lethal.
So you were open to amending the Second Amendment? I didn't hear about concealed carry.
That's felony stupid.
To
Law enforcement says that all the time. So I'm absolutely against reciprocity for CCW.
Just a reminder, use the mic. We have a vast internet audience, so I got it.
To the vast internet audience,
Throngs.
throngs? I
Yeah.
thought it was vast. It's throngs now?
Yeah.
So reciprocity on concealed carry is felony stupid.
Got it.
All right, this is a topic I'm very passionate about. I've been carrying guns my whole adult life, whether in the Marine Corps, as a military policeman, or I work nuclear security up at San Onofre. The number one thing is, I have 2 kids of my own. They're right over there. They're 10 and 11. She turns 12 tomorrow, by the way. And I want them to be safe. I care about you all. I want you all to be safe. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. If we put police officers or security officers on every high school campus, middle school campus in California, or across the nation, that's the best way to stop gun violence. Because you could ban assault rifles all you want. It's not gonna stop handguns from getting into the school. If you look at Great Britain, they banned guns altogether, and there's a machete attack every 90 minutes over there. So, also, good luck changing that, because you need 38 states to agree with you in order to change the Second Amendment.
And concealed carry, you were good with that.
Concealed carry, I've gone through training. I've recently purchased a firearm within the last 6 months. You go through a test, you have to pass the test. You have to show that you know how to handle the firearm before they even give it to you.
Yeah, but the question is about other states have different laws. Do you think they should be allowed to bring those concealed carry?
There needs to be a universal concealed carry rule where everybody's trained to the same standard, where you go and you pass. Before I handled my first gun, when I was 10 years old, I went to a hunter safety course. And they said, how bad can it get? And the worst part is death. So you always have to respect the firearm, and you have to know what it can do.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobs.
Well, thanks to those of you in the room who were so instrumental in doing the walkout here and planning the March for Our Lives. I attended it, and it was truly an amazing thing to see. And all of the student activism around this issue, I really believe, is the reason why this time will be different. And this time, we will really be able to pass legislation and solve a problem that seemed intractable. The day after the March for Our Lives, I actually met with a group of students, some of whom are here in the room, to talk about how they could take some of that activism and excitement and energy and translate it into real political change. And seeing the students engaging in that way and knowing that it's about how you can turn it into political change is one of the reasons why I think this movement is so powerful and why it has fundamentally changed the conversation. So I agree with my fellow Democrats up here. I think we need to ban assault weapons. We need to close loopholes so that everyone gets a background check. We need the CDC to be able to study gun violence. We need to be able to hold gun stores liable. We also need to talk about the intrinsic link between domestic violence and gun violence. So the majority of women who are killed by a gun in this country are killed by their domestic or intimate partner. And if you look at the shooters in Parkland, in the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, in Las Vegas, and elsewhere, they all had a history of committing domestic abuse. So if we could work more upstream and start working on programs that prevent domestic violence, that will actually go a long way towards preventing gun violence as well. I don't agree with the concealed carry reciprocity, and I believe that it's possible to respect the Second Amendment and also pass sensible gun violence prevention reform.
Covered. Thank you.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've owned guns for a very long time. I've supported the Second Amendment, but this insanity has got to stop. And I got to ask a quick question. How many people, if anybody, had a friend that was over in Las Vegas? There's about 10 of us, okay? I didn't hear about my friend for 2 days. I hope you were a lot more fortunate. I was freaking out. This is a good friend of mine. He's a firefighter. I absolutely support, and I'll just give you the laundry list just so that we've covered this ground, universal background checks without loopholes. We've got to prevent felons, domestic violence abusers, people on the terrorist watch list from getting access to guns. Universal background checks. I was in the Navy and I had this strange job, but they taught me how to fire basically every weapon imaginable. They sent me up to Camp Pendleton. And we do not need these weapons of war on our street. We've got to take these guns off the street. I didn't know what a bump stock was until Las Vegas, to be honest. We've got to take bump stocks and ban a universal ban of bump stocks as well. And as to the issue with reciprocity and concealed weapons, you can get a concealed weapon permit in Texas at 7-Eleven. I'm exaggerating to make a point, okay? You cannot. But you know what I'm saying. I don't think Texas laws or any other state that has a more liberal interpretation of these rules, that should allow that person to come to California, where we care a little bit more about who actually has done that and what they've done.
How about banning assault-style weapons like in 1990s?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Everybody has had an opinion about assault-style rifles?
I mentioned assault
Oh,
rifles.
sorry, I didn't hear. So
If I didn't, I'm absolutely 100% ban on assault rifles.
Got it.
As I mentioned, when I was in the service, I fired all these weapons. We don't need these weapons of war on our streets.
Got it. Sorry, dreaming about pizza. All right, our next question comes to us from Riley Winters. Oh, you used your rebuttal? Yeah. So exciting. All right.
I'd like to add that there already is universal background checks. If you're a criminal, that stops criminals from getting guns, but criminals don't follow the rules. I know some people who could go up to LA and pick up a fully automatic AK-47 for $500. Criminals always find a way. So if you ban assault weapons, they'll still be here.
Anybody else? Green card? All right. Next question comes to us from Riley Winters. Riley?
Do you believe the immigration system is flawed, and how do you believe it is flawed? How would you push to fix it at a federal level?
Okay, I think you're sensing the pattern. This one will go to Mr. Maryott.
Thank you, Riley. So, I don't think I'm on. I'm sure I'm not on.
Yeah, I think
I'm on? No. Yeah, that's not on. What do you think?
Thank you, sir.
So, yeah, much better. Thank you. Thank you, Riley, for the question. This is certainly one of the 3 or 4 issues of the day. So for me, immigration is a fairly simple issue, really. There's a lot of complexity within it, but the issue and the question itself is fairly simple. The United States simply can't be an open border country. We just can't. We have too much to offer. We have this tremendous American dream. You can come here, you can build a business, and you can own 4 homes and live this amazing lifestyle, or you can live a more modest lifestyle and build yourself a cabin in the woods and write a novel and live kind of a quiet, modest income life. It's just an amazing story and an amazing place to live. But states like ours in California, and every state, but ours at perhaps the most ambitious level, will also tell you if you fail at that endeavor, that we'll also have a social services program in place for you that'll provide for you about 2 or 3 times the standard of living of the country that you left behind, in many cases, particularly South America. So we just can't have an open border society. And I think we should have an honest discussion about the people who really want one, or they should be willing to engage in an honest discussion about it. For that reason, you need laws and you need rules, and they have to be enforced. It's that simple. If our southern border requires an extension of the security fencing that's already there, I certainly support that. Call it a wall, security fencing, or some combination of the two. We have hundreds of miles of it now. What we did in California is terribly disingenuous and chaotic. We're seeing that now. And as of this morning, we now have another county out of whack with the state, and we have the sheriff within that county, which is this one, by the way, also perhaps out of whack with the county. So I said at the time it was a nonsensical thing to do. It would create chaos, and it's terribly disingenuous because these tremendous people coming up, fighting their way up from these countries, are thinking they're going to get here and everything's going to be fine, and that's not going to be the case. So I think it's a fairly simple process. We just need to have an honest dialogue and get back to the table as major political parties and get back to work on the issue.
Do you think we do need to mobilize and remove the millions of people who are here unauthorized?
I think every case at some level, there are certain types of cases are all different, but there's certainly people living in our country that should probably not be removed and to the country they came from or were brought from.
Okay. Mr. Mills?
Yeah, I guess I want to start my answer to the question by referencing the extra question that you just asked. Is it feasible to deport the people that are here illegally? Okay. Now, there are people who say that it's not feasible to quit selling machine guns, and they think that it's just going to be a snap of the fingers to use cops and armed people with body armor and machine guns to round up 11 million people and get them shoved across the border. And then they say that they believe in due process, but there is no conceivable way that you could do that without setting up a camp structure where you're actually driving millions of people in camps to be deported. It's horrific. And let me tell you, the powers that be in the country don't believe that either. That's something that they tell to racists so that they can wedge them and get them to vote for it, all right? The agricultural system, the way we have it now, would die if we didn't have immigration. Immigrants are a necessary, vital component of our economy. They're hardworking people who put money into Social Security and don't get any back. They grow the food that we eat. The fact that we can side against them and use them for hateful rhetoric, like we're going to round them up into camps and throw them away, disgusts me. And the Peace and Freedom Party supports all working people of the 49th District, and that includes hardworking immigrants and their families. You know, it terrifies me that we're having ICE with more power than they've ever had, grabbing people at hospitals, grabbing people at elementary schools, grabbing people at grocery stores while their kids are screaming, putting kids into the same immigration detention facilities that they put hardened criminals. It's repulsive. We have a net negative migration to Mexico right now. That's the tragic, ridiculous, funny thing about the racist rhetoric coming out of the right at this time. If you were to build this ridiculous wall, it would keep people in. We definitely need, now, we've gotten so far to the right on this question. Ronald Reagan, who conservatives like to say is their big hero, proposed amnesty programs for people who are working here. And I think we need to do what he did, except even more. Stop the war on working people, especially immigrants. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is, in my opinion, one of the top 3 issues that's facing our country and facing our district. In terms of what I would recommend we do, I am in support of building the border fence, the wall. I think we need a wall. I mimic everything Brian Maryott said in that sense. There's simply too much here that everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but many people around the world want. And there's a line. And there are people who are going through the process the right way, and they should not be circumvented by those who want to disregard the law, come here and seek amnesty or whatever their intentions are. I understand that we need workers in fields to grow our food and to process things and do jobs that others don't want to do. Let me tell you something about immigration. It affects my family. My wife's father, my father-in-law, lived in communist Hungary. And he risked his life to escape that place, swimming across the Bay of Trieste, guns pointed at him. You know what he did? He had access to the U.S. Army, who gave him an opportunity to enlist, to peel potatoes quite literally, and to work his way to citizenship, which he did, and he ended up earning a master's degree. I'm very proud of our country and our immigration system, giving opportunities to people who want to go about it the right way, who want to work hard, who want to follow the law, and who want to be contributing citizens of our country.
Would you offer that same opportunity to the millions of people here?
I think they need to get in line and do the same thing, absolutely. And let me say one more thing. DACA and the DREAM Act address only 10% of the illegal immigrant population. What about the other 90%? In fact, I would be for supporting a DACA across the board. Give everyone an opportunity to prove on an individual basis that they can contribute to this country, that they can assimilate, learn English, and that they're not criminals. And if that's the case, maybe we need to offer them a pathway to citizenship. But we got to put that wall in place, and we have to start enforcing our laws, and then we got to figure out a way to deal with the people who are already here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Applegate.
Okay, back in the 80s, when Reagan provided for amnesty, let me tell you how it worked, because I had a rifle company that a third were from Central America. You made sure that they went down and completed their immigration process. That's no longer available to even if you're serving in the military. You need to join when you're in a legal status. There should be a DREAM Act enacted with a pathway to citizenship. Everybody here, unless you're from a native tribe, has the same story of immigration. Some came here with papers. A lot didn't. What we need to do is to be fair to the people that have been here for a long, long time. And both parties are guilty. I've listened to presidents that were Democrats since Clinton that bragged about doing something down at the border. You aren't going to be able to stop immigration at the border. The wall will not stop it. The other Marines sitting up here should know the only way an obstacle works is if you have eyes on it. And it's a pipe dream. And we're right up here when we say net negative immigration from south of the border. Please, don't come away from this talk here tonight and think that amnesty is the same as immigration. Sarah will tell you it's not. It's a completely different process. It happens on the high seas, and it happens at the borders, and it's happening right now with the caravan that's coming up. They're coming to seek asylum. They're coming to turn themselves in. Everybody makes this a wedge issue of hatred, and that's what needs to stop, regardless of the party. And we need to provide a firm pathway to citizenship for these people.
For all unauthorized immigrants who are here?
A pathway, yes.
Okay.
All right. I'm fiscal conservative about this issue. A wall would cost $21 billion to build. People here illegally are using services, schools, hospitals, food stamp programs. They're using housing programs to get free housing. We need to first build a wall. Then we need to provide a pathway to citizenship so they can pay for those services, so their kids can go to school. They can become contributing members of society. It's virtually impossible to send everybody back, and it's financially ruining just to think we could send 11 million people away. I'm not for amnesty. I'm for a pathway to citizenship for everybody that's here.
Thank you.
Oh, minus criminals, felons.
Got it. I think that clarifies. Good.
So thanks for the way you asked the question, because I think it's important to remember that the failure in our immigration system is a systemic failure. And so when we talk about the heartless enforcement, we're talking about the heartless enforcement of a broken system. So how do we fix the system? We need a pathway to citizenship. We need to make sure that we're prioritizing keeping families together. We need to make sure that companies and our agricultural sector can get the workers that they need, but also that they're not abusing the system to outsource jobs. I do think there are some things we can do on the border, like increase technology that will actually improve the flow of people and goods, that will make it go faster. That is not a wall and is not the National Guard. Look, I was in a 5th grade class last week, and a young girl was telling me about her mom's immigration status, and she started crying. And she was so upset, and you could tell that it was something that weighed on her. And how can we expect our kids to be able to learn well in school, to focus, to be kids, when they're constantly worried that that knock on the door is going to be an ICE agent coming to take one of their parents? Just here in Vista, a couple weeks ago, we had ICE raids and deportations ripping apart families. It's awful. So we need to pass a Clean Dream Act. We need to make sure we're fixing our immigration system. We also need to address the issue of deported veterans. I was in Tijuana this weekend visiting a group of deported veterans. It's in fact not true that if you join the service, you automatically get citizenship, and you can be deported for crimes that you probably were committed because of PTS or other issues. And it's true, I also worked on some refugee issues, and we need to be taking in way more refugees than the 11 that we've taken from Syria this year.
And you comfortable with the path to citizenship, or, okay?
Do you remember your first job?
Yes.
Some of you haven't had one. I remember mine like it was yesterday, folks. I was living in a small rural farming town by the name of Eloy out in the middle of the Arizona desert. You probably never heard of it. Seriously. Okay. Anyway, it was summer. I was 12 years old, and very first job I ever had, picking onions, migrant farm workers. The most backbreaking work imaginable. And I'm looking around that field as I'm doing this, and I don't even want to give you the visual. I'm not the youngest person out there at 12. I'm not even close. And there's men and women into their 60s and 70s. I learned tremendous lessons in this small rural farming town. And one of them was this. The men and women who sacrifice everything to come to our country are looking for one thing, a better life for the kids. And let's be clear about that. Now, Eloy has become the hub of deportation. When I was there, it was nothing but a farming town. And we had a prison. We had a federal prison not too far in a little town called Florence. They have built the largest for-profit prison, and it's the deportation center that the vast majority of the ICE detainees are sent to for processing. For-profit prison. Folks, these men and women who are wrapped up in these dragnets, like the one in Escondido 2 weeks ago, 145 people. These folks are getting sent to prison. Let's be real clear about this, with guards, with that exact lifestyle. It's got to stop. Yes, I absolutely support a plan for a path to citizenship for the 11 to 12, depending on who you talk to, million immigrants in our country today.
Got it.
Well, we need a Clean Dream Act, and we need a pathway to citizenship for all 11 million. But I got to tell you, this is incredibly personal to me. And those of you who know me know this, but most of you do not know that my grandparents on my mom's side came from Mexico. On the one side, Jewish, that's how I got the last name Levin, Eastern European descent, but my mom, her side of the family, from Mexico. And my grandma came when she was 3 years old. My grandpa came when he was 11 years old. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any formal education. They didn't speak English, but they believed that if they worked incredibly hard and they played by the rules, that they could get ahead in this country. And that is exactly what happened. My grandfather and his two brothers started a jukebox rental business in Los Angeles, and they were able to do very well from absolutely nothing to a thriving business. And my grandma and grandpa had 5 daughters. My mom was the second oldest of the 5. All 5 of the daughters wound up going to college. 3 of them wound up getting advanced degrees. None of my grandparents even graduated from high school. And this, I think, is one of the fundamental questions of our time. Whether or not we are going to reject the rhetoric of Donald Trump and others in the Republican Party, including Kristen Gaspar, who I hope is listening to this, who just this morning went on Fox to try to divide us on the basis of immigration status. This is a country of immigrants. We respect and appreciate our immigrants. My grandparents were the dreamers of their day, and now we need to respect the dreamers of today. We have dreamers all around us. I've got some working on our campaign. They are the very best of America. When we remember what really made this country great, we remember that we respect and appreciate people regardless of their country of origin. We better get back to that place, or we're not going to recognize this country.
Path to citizenship, okay? All right,
Yes.
one quick one. I was supposed to cut him off the next round, but go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to him. So I just want to point out for you students, as you look at where you go with your political philosophy in life, and it can change over time as well. Something has happened here in this debate, and there's two parties primarily guilty of it, or on display with it, but it often happens in immigration discussion where the alt-left, as I call it, there's just a segment, just like there's an alt-right, will morph the debate and begin to drop the word illegal. And this discussion is not about legal immigration. And the heartfelt stories we tell, and I have my own, are not about legal immigration. They're about illegal immigration. The second thing is the word racist, which you've said about 8 or 10 times tonight, and I find just completely offensive. And it's a favorite, tactic, but it's despicable. And I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, can I green?
All right. So we can either do one more question or you can have your greens. Let's do one more question. Everybody up for that? All right, one more question, 1 minute each, and let's go from there. So this person asking this is Sydney Schlafman. Sydney, again, you'll have 1 minute, and moderator's prerogative.
How do you believe the federal budget for renewable energy should be distributed? What are the key differences between your priorities and the current federal budget objectives?
Mr. Mills.
Well, first off, it's racist. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's ridiculous that we wouldn't make as much of a national effort as possible to get renewable energy implemented and to do something about carbon emissions. It's disgraceful that we're letting other countries like China control the debate on renewables and that they're getting most of the economic benefit from doing it while we are resisting the implementation of renewables and the subsidy of renewables here. And I think everyone on here, at least on the Democrat side or on the liberal side, is going to say that they believe in subsidizing our approach to renewables. And most of the conservatives and Republicans are going to say that the free market is a really great way to get renewables going, and that they think the free market is our best way to transition away from fossil fuels. Well, look, that is the assumption that both parties have that is going to get everyone killed. Okay? We cannot free market our way out of this situation. We need to treat this like we treated going to the moon. We need to treat this like we treated rebuilding Europe. We need to treat this like we treated the biggest problems confronting peoplekind, because it's the biggest problem out there and we need to do something about it.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah, it's really hard to follow Jordan. He's a great guy, but he's so enthusiastic. Anyway, I would never support a cap and trade. I would like to support let the free markets deal with it, as Jordan had pointed out, anticipated properly. But one thing I disagree with Trump on is offshore drilling. I'm a surfer, and I strongly oppose offshore drilling locally, but also all around the country. So I just wanted to point that out.
Cool. Mr. Applegate.
I really love the surfer exception to offshore drilling. I really do. I've heard it all up and down the 49th. Let me cut right to the chase. It is going to be the free market that corrects this. Because if you get away from the oil subsidies that cost $60 billion a year, and we have an energy glut right now, Deloitte's been telling the major corporations, yeah, I'm a Democrat talking about corporations, that the best return on investment right now is sustainable, renewable energy. That's the way we're going to get there. And Deloitte's telling them we can get there in 10 years, not 50 like they've been saying, or rather 40 like they've been saying up north in Sacramento. We need to harness the market. We need to end subsidies. And the rest of the world is racing towards it. That's where we need to go, and that's where we can get to a completely different economy. And yes, it is racist because working families right now can't participate in renewals as it's structured. And I ran out of time to tell you how to change.
All right, energy. I work for an energy company. I'm pro-nuclear. Nuclear's the cleanest air energy out there. It produces about a styrofoam cup worth of waste compared to a ton of carbon emissions from gas-powered plants. When they shut down San Onofre, they had to bring online 3 petroleum plants to cover the energy from San Onofre, just so you know. Renewables, solar only works during the day. Wind only works when the wind's blowing. They're great. We should diversify where our energy comes from. We need to get rid of the carbon burning. We need to get rid of the coal. But they have clean coal, but we need to slowly wean ourselves off of it. Petroleum, we spend way too much money on petroleum. The gas companies are making hand over fist profits, and we're subsidizing them.
Can I just have it? Thanks. I think we need to move to an entirely clean energy, renewable energy economy by 2050. I think we need to support the entities like local governments and state governments that are continuing to uphold our commitments to the Paris Climate Accord and hopefully flip the House so the federal government can once again sign on to the Paris Climate Accord. We need targeted investment in renewable energy so that we can make sure that those green energy jobs of the future are good union jobs. We also need to make sure that we are adequately funding and enforcing the Clean Water and Clean Air Acts because many of the communities that are most impacted by the effects of climate change right now are also vulnerable for other reasons, and so we need to make sure we have the funding and services to build resiliency in those communities as we're addressing the broader threat of climate change as well.
What we're talking about basically is climate change at the end of the day, and this must be addressed. For those of you that haven't studied this, and I'm probably talking to the younger students here, we got to the moon because a president set a target, okay, and then we achieved that target, that goal. We need to do the same thing here. The goal should be 2045, and then we'll work to get it. In San Diego, we're blessed because we have some of the most innovative green energy, clean tech firms in the country working on a variety of issues. Yes, okay, storage is a problem right now, but that's a problem we can solve. We've got to dedicate the effort. We've got to dedicate ourselves to becoming 100% based on renewable at the national level by 2045, and then we will achieve it.
Well, I'm incredibly pleased that this question was asked because it wasn't asked nearly enough in the presidential election. It wasn't asked nearly enough in last year's congressional elections. This is the most important issue that we face, in my opinion. If we do not get climate change right, if we continue down a course where we are destroying our planet with dirtier air and dirtier water and a dirtier coast, this is not something we get to fix. There is no planet B. That's why when I started the campaign, back when ISA was there, the first thing I did is send him a copy of the book, Climate Change for Beginners, because for 16 years, he and the Republicans have denied the fundamental scientific consensus on climate. And there is no bigger offender than Donald J. Trump. Shame on him, shame on Scott Pruitt. We have an EPA administrator who doesn't even believe in environmental protection, who can't even come out in the open, who spends millions on security because he is bought by the Koch brothers. We've got to stand up and defeat them, or we will not have another chance. Thank you.
I think differently. Use a different mic.
I had to be loud. Use a different mic? Oh. We're having some fun with the mics. Henry Ford wasn't subsidized, but that's just a little fun fact. I do think that it's been appropriate to inspire a little bit green energy, and I think we have some great success, and particularly in San Diego County. Paul's right about that, and I think we'll get there someday. I think the real issue, which I think is found discussing and getting back to the table and getting back to work on this, is what's the right balanced approach? What's the way to do it for our country? The quality of air and our climate in general is a planetary issue. The U.S. can lead by example, but we can only lead by such an example. There's a limit to what we can do. We can't put whole cities and whole families out of work and out of business. We just can't do it. We've got developing countries planting hundreds of coal plants with no mention of clean coal. We've got half the developed world that still doesn't want to put catalytic converters in cars. So we can lead by example, but we have to have something reasonable about the discussion, the debate, as it regards our climate.
Okay, we have 30 seconds for each candidate to close out. And we are going to begin with Mr. Schoonover.
Okay, well, thanks again for having me tonight to all the students. I'm really proud that you are taking the time to study these issues. Even if you can't vote yet, you will be voters soon. So thank you for your participation. I just want to really have the opportunity to represent this district. If given that opportunity, I know I will represent you well. I really have good intentions. I have a good heart. And I've studied the law. I continue to study the law, and I try to do things that help people. I think that's really the only message I have, is that I'm coming from the right place, and I'm doing it for the right reasons. Thanks.
Mr. Applegate?
Good questions all, but we didn't ask one tonight. How are each of us going to vote on the issue of war? Because it's on the horizon again, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody needs to answer, what would you have done with the Iraq War resolution? I was against it, and I deployed there. You're also going to have to recognize, what are you going to do with the next resolution that comes up? Congress needs to demand it, and we need people that we know are going to vote no.
Fiscal conservative, always. I got taxed at 45% last year, and that's really high. It's June 13th if I was to pay my taxes first, before I'd pay off my taxes, before I'd start making money. Also, I would have voted no war. It's expensive. We already spend $900 billion a year. But along with tax cuts, you need spending cuts. You can't just cut taxes and expect things to go away.
Well, thank you all so much for your great questions and for putting on this event. We've seen throughout American history that change has really happened when young people have gotten involved, whether that was the civil rights movement, the LGBT movement, or what we're seeing right now on gun violence prevention. And we know that if the government was more representative, if it had more than 20% women and more than 6 millennials, then all of the issues that you and I care so deeply about could actually be solved. We don't have to settle for the way things have always been done. We can change them, and I hope you'll join us in doing that. Sara Jacobs, thank you.
Folks, we had a good week last week. Paul Ryan decided he's not going to run for re-election. We had a great week in February. Darrell Issa decided he was not going to run for re-election. And what's happening all across this country, starting with Paul Ryan, is we're getting a different kind of candidate emerge. The guy who's going to replace him is an iron worker. He's a cancer survivor. His mother has MS. They're struggling. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to start electing a different kind of candidate, somebody truly understands the struggles Americans are facing today.
I want to thank everybody for organizing, the students for organizing this debate. Did a better job than a lot of the adults organizing similar debates. So you should, no offense, you should be incredibly proud. And you, absolutely. You need a member of Congress who's going to listen to student leaders. They're the foundation of our campaign. Darrell Issa has not listened to much of anything from anyone. In the last decade, he's only held 3 town hall meetings. Everybody up on this stage, you should demand they do at least one a month. If you get sick of us, you'll let us know. My name's Mike Levin. I'd be honored to have your support. Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the saddest things I've heard on the campaign trail is the notion that there's a civil war brewing in this country, only one without guns. The most important thing for you students to take away from tonight, and probably our future leaders, is the most important right of all the ones we didn't discuss tonight, is the right of free thought and expression of that thought. It's so important. The answers for all of our debates usually lies somewhere in the middle. The name calling, the bashing others, the snide references to people who aren't even running for re-election has no place. We can get to the common goal, which we all share, but we can get there the right and thoughtful way, and I encourage you all to take that with you in the years going forward. It's been fun spending the evening with you.
Thank you. All right. First off, thank you so much, Colonel Applegate, for bringing that up. That is the most important decision. You know, a couple days ago, I put out a call for the candidates to come and support my pledge to not support any bombing to Syria and an escalation of the war in Syria. And I'm so happy that Colonel Applegate agreed to it. Sara Jacobs agreed to it when we were visiting the deported veterans home. Joshua Hancock signed on to it. It looks like we got Levin here, the Green candidate as well. And if people don't believe me, talk to Josh Hancock, conservatives. He'll give you a good reason to oppose war. And join me in the streets with the Answer Coalition, because we have to organize on the streets against this war, and we'll be there. Look at my Facebook page for events.
Okay, it's hard to run for office. It's hard to put yourself out there. So let's give everybody a hand. There will be two students who would like to close the forum with a prepared statement. That'd be Jaron Fabular and Katie Mychek.
Hello everyone, my name is Katie Metchik.
And my name is Jaron Fabular.
And we want to thank you all so much for attending this momentous occasion.
We also would like to thank the candidates for taking their time to answer our questions, as well as all the people that helped us coordinate the logistics to bring this event to fruition.
A special thank you to Mr. Peden and Mr. Schulman, who gave us this opportunity to delve into our interests and get more involved in our local government.
Moving forward, we hope that you all take away a great deal of newfound knowledge from this forum and are inspired to take action. We would like to challenge everyone to get more involved in their local government. We are a democracy, and the issues that were discussed here today are issues that not only our government has to tackle, but they are issues that we must tackle ourselves as well. Do not stand idly by. Our engagement in politics does not stop at the door.
Let me remind you that this is just the beginning of the ongoing civil discourse. If you are 16 years of age or older, you are eligible to register to vote right now. We encourage everyone here to go out and do that, because each and every one of your opinions, hopes, and voices matter.
Please give another huge round of applause to our teachers and our fellow classmates for putting this all together. Scott Lewis from the Voice of San Diego for moderating.
If you want to get to know Voice of San Diego more or follow local politics like this, I have some of these up here. Sorry, I got to do that.
And to the candidates that set aside their time to be here.
We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your nights, and we encourage you all to vote in the primary election on June 5th. Thank you.